The Ben 10 franchise may not be my favorite cartoon of all time, but it is a series that I've been mentioning a lot over the past few years. I've said some positive things, like how Ben 10 Omniverse has characters that effectively challenge the main protagonist, and I've also said some negative things, like how Ben 10 Alien Force puts the protagonist on a pedestal rather than focusing on his growth as a character. But I'm not saying that because I want to tear down what talented people have created. I'm saying these things because I see a lot of potential in the core concept behind Ben 10, and I have specific ideas for what the series should focus on. I've talked about what works about the franchise and what doesn't work, so now it's time I put myself in the shoes of someone actually trying to make something and pitch my ideas for how I would design a brand new Ben 10 animated series, with internal challenges, villains that reflect the heroes' worst traits back at them, and continuous character development that still works under serialized storytelling. I don't know if I would ever be officially hired for it, but just to practice getting my ideas out there, this is how I would write a Ben 10 cartoon. Ever since I first heard about the 2016 Ben 10 reboot, I've been disappointed by the art style, but I do understand why they decided to make a reboot to begin with, because not only is the road trip premise a lot of fun, it makes sense to try things again with a clean slate. And despite the fact that they've already done a reboot, I still think there's enough room for another one, because throughout the two different continuities, we've never really gotten a story that follows Ben's character arc across the overarching narrative. Like, he'll grow as a person by the end of certain episodes, but every so often, the show resets his character and has him relearn the same lessons that he already went through. Granted, this is probably because the show would air its episodes out of order so that audiences who are just tuning in could still follow along, but since there are other cartoons that have been able to do narrative-spanning character arcs, I think we can manage something similar. I don't want to just see Ben 10 again, or a homogenized Ben 10 with safety bumpers on. I want to see Ben 10 remixed in the style of Kid Cosmic, Generator Rex, and Avatar: The Last Airbender. A series where Ben Tennyson doesn't just grow over the course of each episode, but over the course of the entire series itself, where you chart each specific lesson that he's going to learn and make sure they don't interfere with or repeat each other, so that it really feels like he's actually making progress. My favorite takes on Ben 10's character have been where he wants to be a superhero yet needs to learn responsibility, where he always wears sports jerseys with the number 10 on them and isn't above stealing ice cream whenever he feels like it. For me, Ben Tennyson is an immature, bratty 10-year-old who needs to listen to the advice of his grandpa Max, as well as the criticism of his cousin Gwen, and I have no intention of changing that. But I do think we can flesh out how his character works a bit more and add 3 specific catalysts for his development. I want Ben to grow as a character by sacrificing what he wants, seeing himself in the villain, and seeing himself in somebody in need. I want him to be more like Generator Rex by giving up the things he wants to do what's right, and I want him to face villains that reflect his own worst traits back at him so that he can realize that what he's been doing is wrong. But I also want him to be learning how to have empathy for other living beings so that he can actually help them the way that a real hero would. For episode 1, I would borrow a lot of things from the first episode of the original series, but I'd want it to be about Ben starting to learn that heroism is about helping others rather than being awesome. Like, instead of standing up to bullies only to become another victim, I would rather have Ben maybe daydream about standing up to bullies as part of a superhero fantasy, and then spend the episode contrasting that fantasy against the actual reality he lives in, culminating in an action sequence that begins as a fight, but transforms into a rescue when he realizes that people's lives are in danger. We don't just have Ben grow by finally starting to listen to Grandpa Max and Cousin Gwen, we have him grow by developing his empathy for people, because that's what his superpowers were actually made for to begin with. The Omnitrix watch that lets Ben transform into more than 10 different aliens wasn't created for the sake of power. It was created by the Galvan scientist Azimuth to give individuals the ability to walk a mile in the shoes of a completely different species, to see the world from their eyes, which makes it the perfect tool to help Ben 10 stop seeing himself as the center of the universe. I still want to keep around characters like Vilgax and all the bounty hunter antagonists, but I also want Ben to be meeting alien species that he's already transformed into, and relating to them because of that. They should be characters that Ben teams up with to fight the latest bad guy, or characters that Ben needs to protect from the latest bad guy, be they other aliens or xenophobic humans who can't see outside of their own lives. You could have an episode where Ben has been watching so many alien invasion movies that he thinks all aliens are bad guys, but then gets captured by a corrupt government agency while in one of his alien forms, and learns that there are innocent aliens being held against their will simply for being extraterrestrial, causing Ben to rethink his perception of the world. We could bring back the Sect Agency from the original series to serve as this kind of villain, or we could go a bit farther and have the Plumbers organization that Grandpa Max used to be part of be corrupt and now called the Rooters, so that not only are the characters without the giant safety net it used to provide, it would make their journey also be about defeating an evil status quo to make a positive difference in the world. I know it's a big deviation from the original series, but I think that if you're going to bring back the Plumbers, making them evil would be an interesting and challenging direction for the series. Whatever classic Ben 10 villains we use, I want to make sure that they challenge the protagonists and function as a mirror of their respective heroes. Like, Vilgax shouldn't just be a big, powerful bad guy, he should be a reflection of Ben's selfishness and desire for power, showing us that Ben needs to stop being motivated by personal gain so that he doesn't end up like Vilgax. In other words, my favorite kinds of Ben 10 villains are the ones that are basically just evil versions of Ben, so I definitely want to include the literal evil Ben clones like Eon, the evil Ben 10 from the future, and Albedo, the jealous Galvan who accidentally turned himself into Ben's Shadow the Hedgehog doppelganger. If we want to include a classic Ben 10 villain, but we're not seeing any immediate similarities at first, all we have to do is rewrite the characters a little, or put them in situations where we can draw out those similarities. Like, if you're going to make Zombozo the zombie-themed clown into the main villain of an episode, have it be where Ben is trying to scare Cousin Gwen or is taking advantage of her phobias, so that when Zombozo takes advantage of Ben's phobia of clowns, it forces Ben to understand Gwen's feelings and learn to be more considerate of them. When it comes to villains like Hex and Charmcaster, I'd consider them as being Cousin Gwen's villains rather than Ben's, since they all practice magic, so I'd write them to reflect Gwen's worst traits back at her, like being too judgmental or condescending. But if we want to have a magic-based villain who acts as a foil to Ben specifically, I think it would be neat if Charmcaster had a little brother named Cursebreaker, who could be a dark reflection of Ben's feral id, and whose relationship with Charmcaster could parallel Ben and Gwen's dynamic, showing us that they're functionally more like siblings than cousins. See, I'm fine with creating brand new OC characters to serve as villains, just as long as they have a point to them in regards to the main characters. Out of all the classic Ben 10 villains, Kevin Ethan Levin is one of the most iconic, but also a bit of an outlier, because he's one of the few antagonists who has gone from being a bad guy to being a fully fledged secondary protagonist, and I want to write his character with that in mind, where he's more of an anti-villain or an anti-hero rather than somebody pure evil. He can still be a juvenile delinquent who reflects Ben's rebelliousness back at him, but I also want Kevin to have some humanity inside him, and go through a character arc where by the end, it wouldn't feel out of left field for him to become a main hero. Imagine something like the critically acclaimed Zuko Alone episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender, but with Kevin Levin, or at least the same sort of humanizing character writing that Zuko got applied to Kevin's character, where you make the audience start to root for Kevin, make them want for him to become a good guy, and then when the time is right, have him join up with Ben Tennyson in a way that's not just a reference to Ben 10 Alien Force, but a genuine catharsis for everyone that has been following his character. If you want more ideas for specific episodes, I'm also interested in exploring stories where the Vriedel brothers are portrayed more like cowboys than rednecks, where Ben needs to break up with Kai Green because she's more interested in his aliens rather than Ben as himself, and even have a few episodes that focus on Ben and Gwen's alien heritage in a way that doesn't retcon Gwen's magic powers. I think it would also be neat to do a Gwen 10 episode as like a multiverse team up with Ben 10, where they have to work together to rescue their respective cousins, and if I was ever to do an episode focusing on Eon, I would have it be about a future Gwen time traveling back to the present day to prevent current Ben from becoming evil, only for Eon to follow her there and have a huge battle ensue, but then during the 11th hour, Ben 10,000 would show up and prove that Ben's future isn't set in stone, that he's still capable of becoming a true hero. When it comes to Alien X, the most powerful Omnitrix alien of all time, I want to keep the whole deal where Ben has to negotiate with two additional personalities named Bellicus and Serena, but instead of being two annoying green faces that make Alien X seem inconvenient, they should be judges of Ben's character. They should know what Ben has used his aliens for in the past and refuse to work with him because of that, because they cannot allow anyone to abuse the greatest power in the universe. We introduce them in a middle season where Ben is still up to his shenanigans, and once he's grown more as a character or reached a point where he stops abusing his powers for personal gain, then Bellicus and Serena finally start to help Ben when he needs it. I don't want Alien X to be just another transformation in the Omnitrix or one that feels like a waste of time. I want it to play a role in the story as something that helps the audience measure Ben's growth, something that can dramatically come into play during a season finale to show just how far Ben has grown as a character. Since you're all probably interested in knowing which Omnitrix aliens I'd like my series to start with, I want to make sure that we design Ben's abilities to function like a toolbox, where each alien has a specific, simple power set that can be used in a variety of situations, with examples being classic aliens like Forearms, Accelerate, Heat Blast, Grey Matter, and even Diamond Head, as well as sequel aliens like Goop, Jet Ray, and Water Hazard, rather than the ones that basically power creep previous alien abilities. I still want Ben to accidentally wind up with an alien that isn't suited for the current situation and make it more of an uphill battle, but I'm also really interested in aliens that draw out aspects of Ben's character, like how Wild Mutt feels like an extension of Ben's psychological id, or how Feedback from Ben 10 Omniverse isn't just Ben's favorite alien, but his idealized self, which I think should make it the go-to alien to use whenever Ben has a significant character moment and needs a fight scene to follow it. Whatever happens in this cartoon, there needs to be a purpose behind it. It needs to either tie into the themes of the narrative or reveal something about Ben Tennyson as a character. As for the voice cast, I actually don't want to bring back the original actors to portray the main characters again. Like Tara Strong, Paul Eiding, and Megan Moore have already had their time with the roles, so I'd prefer to move on to some new talent rather than try to recreate how things were in the past. If they really want to come back, they can always cameo as one of the aliens or something. For Ben 10, I think that Colleen O'Shaughnessy, the current voice of Tails from Sonic the Hedgehog, could do a serviceable job as Ben Tennyson, but I'm also interested in finding an actual kid actor to play a continuously growing Ben 10, kind of like how Zach Tyler Eisen played Aang in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Speaking of Avatar, Katara's original voice actress, Mae Whitman, would be my first choice to play Cousin Gwen, and I'd like to see somebody like Jonathan Banks from Breaking Bad, Kevin Conroy from Batman, or maybe even Jonathan Frakes from Star Trek in the role of Grandpa Max. If we want Ben 10,000 to sound young, we could get Charlie Day from Always Sunny. If we want him to sound heroic, we could get Pedro Pascal from The Mandalorian. Or if we want to draw out Ben's similarities with Vilgax, we could even get Vilgax's original voice actor Steve Bloom to play a confident, gravelly voiced adult Ben. As for Vilgax himself, my first choice would be Frank Welker from Transformers Prime, but I'm also open to suggestions if there's a better candidate out there. Kevin 11, I think, should be played by Andrew Francis from Mega Man NT Warrior. It would be really cool if we could get Jeffrey Combs, Giancarlo Esposito, or Brent Spiner to play Azimuth. Wendy Malick from The Owl House should play Grandma Verdona. Michael McKean from Better Call Saul would be great as a villainous Phil Billings. Matt Jones from Breaking Bad should play Argit. Kari Walgren from Fooly Cooly should be Princess Atea, and Richard Horvitz, as well as Ricky Simmons from Invader Zim, should definitely play a few aliens, but I'm saving Heat Blast for Zeno Robinson and Accelerate for Ogie Banks. As for those cameo roles that the original cast members could play, I have Paul Eiding as Waybeg, Yuri Lowenthal as Feedback, Tara Strong as Ben's Anodite alien form, and for Alien X, I would love it if we had like a synthesis of Tara Strong, Yuri Lowenthal, and our current Ben voice, so that Alien X would be voiced by 3 generations of Ben 10 at once. Like my reboot idea as a whole, I know it's all a bit of a pipe dream, but I think it could be pretty cool. Again, Ben 10 is not my favorite cartoon of all time, but it's still very important to me because it's a story about teaching kids how to be better people from the perspective of their own level. The series gives them an audience surrogate who isn't a role model, but the opposite. Someone who is brash, selfish, immature, and does every wrong thing that every kid is tempted to do, which doesn't just demonstrate an understanding of how kids think, it shows them how those actions are wrong by walking them through that line of behavior, by showing them how it negatively affects the people around them. And what's more, it even shows them that at the end of the day, they still have a chance to redeem themselves. Because if someone like Ben Tennyson can become a better person, it means that anyone can too. Anyone can become a true hero. For me, these kinds of ideas are what making cartoons is all about. We're not just trying to entertain an audience of kids, we're trying to immortalize the things we care about and pass them down to the next generation. So I don't just want to make another Ben 10 cartoon, I want to make something that focuses on what I think is important about Ben 10, something that carries on what I believe in, and makes it so that kids in the future might believe in those things too. I don't just want to see my favorite Omnitrix aliens on screen again, I want a story where Ben 10 continuously grows as a person over the course of the entire series, where Ben sacrifices the things he wants for the sake of the greater good, where he undergoes self-reflection after seeing how similar he is to the villains, and most importantly, where Benjamin Kirby Tennyson learns to empathize with people. Because it shouldn't just be about becoming a superhero, it should be about how a 10-year-old kid learns to care about others by experiencing what it's like to live as more than 10 different aliens. That is how I would write a Ben 10 cartoon.